This video is brought to you by Imprint. Most of America and much of the rest of the world is currently fixated on the upcoming presidential election between Harris and Trump. The polls are as close as ever, and who wins on November the 5th is basically a toss-up. However, the nail-biting nature of the presidential election means little attention has been paid to the congressional elections, which happen on the same day, and will determine whether either candidate can actually enact their domestic agenda. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the electoral battle for the House and the Senate, and whether either party could win a governing trifecta. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. First, let's look at the House, where Republicans currently enjoy a narrow majority with just 220 seats. Polls currently suggest the race for the House, much like the race for the White House, is basically a toss-up. 538's forecast, for instance, gives Republicans a 53% chance of keeping the House, while The Economist's congressional tracker and the most recent YouGov polling give Democrats a slight edge. If Democrats were to retake the House, this would be the first time a party has lost control of the chamber after a single congressional term since 1954. Anyway, for Democrats to flip the House, they only need to win 5 more seats, while defending their current ones. When it comes to winning new seats, Democrats apparently have a two-pronged strategy, focusing on a handful of seats in the Midwest and winning back some of the seats in deep blue states like New York and California that they lost in 2022. In the Midwest, Democrats are hoping to unseat Representative John James in Michigan's 10th, who is seen as a rising star in the Republican Party and was given a prominent speaking slot at the 2024 RNC. Democrats have committed $1.4 million in TV ad buys in the district, and Tim Walz made a visit to Macomb County in the 10th just last week. In Iowa's first, Democratic polling shows Republican Representative Mariannette Miller Meeks with a net approval of -11, and internal polling shows Iowa's third and Wisconsin's third within the margin of error. Democrats are also optimistic about their chances in Nebraska's 2nd and even Pennsylvania's 10th, where Representative Scott Perry, a Trumpist candidate, is down 9 points against his Democratic opponent, having won in 2022 by nearly 8 points. In New York and California, Democrats want to win back at least some of the 9 districts won in 2020 but flipped by Republicans in 2022. Democrats might be hurt in New York by the unpopularity of incumbent Democratic governor in Kathy Hochul and the corruption scandal currently engulfing New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Overall, though, Democrats' chances have been boosted by court rulings against Republican gerrymandering efforts in Louisiana and Alabama, effectively giving the Democrats 2 more seats than they would have won otherwise, and Democrat House candidates have enjoyed far more in funding than their Republican opponents. Finally, Democrats will be hoping that the abortion referendums in Arizona, Nevada, and Montana will help them in those states. For their part, Republicans are hoping to flip seats held by relatively conservative Democrats, sometimes known as Blue Dog Democrats. Specifically, they're looking at Washington's 3rd, held by Marie Perez, Maine's 2nd, held by Jared Golden, and Alaska's Seoul District, currently held by Mary Peltola. Peltola and Golden both benefited from ranked choice voting last time around, but Peltola currently only has 1 Republican opponent other than the multiple Republicans she had to face in 2022. This Republican consolidation could hurt, although it's worth mentioning that her opponent, Nick Begich III, isn't all that popular. Similarly, Perez is lucky that her opponent is Trumpist Republican Joe Kent, the same candidate she beat in 2022, in part thanks to his controversial ties to far-right political pundit Nick Fuentes. Now, let's turn our attention to the Senate, where things look a fair bit worse for the Democrats. Unlike in the House, where every seat is up for grabs, in the Senate only a third of seats, or 34 this time around, are up for re-election. Of these, 23 are held by Democrats or Democrat-leaning independents, while just 11 are held by Republicans. To maintain their functioning majority, which currently sits at 51 seats, Democrats can either win 51 seats again or lose 1 seat but win the presidential election, leaving Tim Walz as the tie-breaking vote. Winning 51 seats would be very difficult, given that Joe Manchin's seat in West Virginia is overwhelmingly likely to switch to Republican, and Democrat seats in Ohio and Montana are very much in jeopardy, to say nothing of the relatively close races in swing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. In Montana, a state that Trump is expected to win by at least 10 points, longtime incumbent Jon Tester is facing a tough re-election battle against Republican Tim Sheehy. Polls suggest Tester is a couple of points behind, although he'll be hoping that the abortion referendum on the ballot in Montana will help Democrat turnout. In Ohio, Democrat Sherrod Brown has a slight poll lead over Republican Bernie Moreno, but Trump is expected to win the state by at least 5 points, and Moreno could ride his coattails. If Democrats lose either Montana or Ohio, they'll need to flip a seat to deny Republicans a majority. Now, Democrats do have a couple offensive opportunities here. There's an outside chance in Florida, where Rick Scott's up for re-election after winning by the tiniest margin in 2018, although Florida has trended red since then, and most polls have him up a few points against his Democrat challenger, Debbie McCarsell-Powell. Democrats' odds are slightly better in Texas, where unpopular incumbent Ted Cruz is in a competitive race between Democrat Colin Allred, although polls still give Cruz the edge. But the state where Republicans arguably look most likely to lose is Nebraska. Despite Nebraska being solidly red, Trump is on track to win it by something like 20 points, independent candidate Dan Osborne is making a strong challenge against incumbent Republican Deb Fischer. Osborne, a former union president who led his colleagues in the Kellogg strike in 2021, is running on a sort of anti-establishment pro-worker platform, and has benefited from the fact that Fischer has spent much of her term in Washington working on committee work and promised to only serve 2 terms, which she's since done. Now, Osborne has said he wouldn't caucus with either party, and his policy position doesn't neatly fit into a Republican or Democratic box. But if he were to win, his presence could really complicate the electoral arithmetic for the Republicans. In conclusion, much like the race for the presidency, the race for Congress is ridiculously tight this year, and both parties could plausibly win a governmental trifecta, although Democrats are probably marginally less likely to achieve this, given their difficulties in the Senate. Fans of TLDR like you care about understanding the world around them. That's where today's sponsor Imprint comes into play. If you care about building a life of learning, then Imprint is the app for you. It's a new way to learn that turns your phone from an attention-sucking device to a tool for growth. You may have heard this before, but unless you've used the app, you likely haven't experienced something like this. That's because Imprint is beautifully illustrated and animated, creating a highly visual, bite-sized and interactive learning experience. It's the perfect antidote to a world where social media tries to keep us mindlessly dopamine scrolling day in and day out. Their library includes courses on topics like psychology, history, philosophy, finance, productivity, and many more, and quick reads you can consume in a single sitting. Since we last spoke to you about Imprint in September, I've done the philosophy course and am focusing on their course on the science of happiness. People study how to get in shape, how to eat right, and how to advance in their career. Understanding how humans are wired to be happy has been an interesting path to go down that I highly recommend to all of you. So make yourself feel better about your screen time, build a real habit of learning every day, and join the millions of people using Imprint. Plus, if you use the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen, the first 200 people will get 20% off an annual plan. Plus, they'll know that you came from us.